Call to order the Wednesday, August 21st, HLRB meeting. Please call the roll.
Mari Davis,
Here.
Andrea,
Here.
Robert Dutka, here, Andrew Packwood,
Here.
Foster, Carmela Ham, is anybody on? Yeah.
Carmela's on.
Ray Henley,
Yes.
Jerry Burks, Joan Lawrence, here,
No.
Rebecca Meyer, I think is joining virtually, Katie Myers, Mark Turnbull,
Here.
not sure, not here yet, and Dick is joining virtually. See when people start.
And those were all applicants. So nobody from the
But we, okay, that's great.
Who's joining?
Oh,
Okay, great. Well, all right, so in that case, we'll read the explanation of the public hearing procedures. So effective September 1st, 2022, new state legislation now requires certain county appointed boards in the HLRB to have in-person quorum to conduct the business. HLRB hearings are provided in a hybrid environment, both in person and attended online. Members of the public may attend and participate either virtually or in person. Members of the board and members of the public joining us this evening. Today's meeting will be available to stream via Teams link on the county website. Board members, presenters, or speakers whose internet connectivity, please reconnect via phone. Keep your device muted and your video turned off until you are called on to speak. Public speakers not sponsoring items on the agenda, your reservation to speak online after the meeting was required. Speaker slips are available at the front of the room. Those in-person speakers. I'll call you to speak after presentation of the agenda item. The meeting chat is active for participants who need technical assistance only. It should not be used for discussion and public comment, questions about agenda items, or requests for more information. All public comments must be shared verbally for the record during the assigned public testimony period. All voting will be done by calling the roll. Lastly, to the public forum, today's meeting will be recorded and posted to the county website. All information associated with today's meeting, whether written or spoken, subject to Freedom of Information Act requirements. And with that, we'll move on to review approval of the minutes for July. All right. Questions or concerns about the minutes from July?
Motion to approve.
Second. Right. Mari Davis,
Yes.
Andrea,
Yes.
Andrew Packwood,
Yes.
Ray Henley,
Yes.
Joan Lawrence, staying. Katie Myers,
Yes.
Rebecca Meyer,
Abstain.
Mark Turnbull,
Yes.
motion carries.
All that. Fantastic.
Oh, sorry, Lauren, I was there in July. So I'm a yes.
You're a yes? Okay,
Yes, sorry.
no worries, thanks.
All right, fantastic. All right. With that, let's move on to public consent agenda items. There are two items on the list today. There's 17, there's COA 24-10A, as you can see, and also COA 24-17. Are any comments or questions or concerns regarding two consent items?
Just a question about the Columbia pipeline. Was the logo position?
Yes, so they moved it from the originally had been part of like the main sign at the top. They did move it to the ground level. And so it's there now in the final proposal.
I thought that probably was the case since they were just.
Mhm. Yep.
So with that, is there a motion to approve?
I move we approve the items on the consent agenda. Second.
Please call the roll.
Mari Davis,
Yes.
Leanne Dreyer,
Yes.
Andrew Fackler,
Yes.
Ray Henley,
Yes.
Jerry Laporte,
Yes.
Joan Lawrence,
Yes.
Rebecca Meyer,
Yes.
Katie Myers, Mark Turnbull,
Yes.
Andy Winchell.
Here.
Do you agree to the consent agenda? Great. Okay. Motion carries. Okay.
All right. All right. There are a couple of administrative, there's one administrative COA rather on the agenda just for record. And now moving to our first item, I guess, that we're, park naming of Paris City site plan that for the North Glebe Park.
We do, so the applicants for this project are online and they're going to be giving the presentation. So whenever Walter, you and your team are ready, you're happy to speak now, and I can go through the slides for you all.
Hi, yes. This is Mary Sun. So we are ready.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you for having us. My name is Mary Sin. I'm with Southeastern Development, the developer of 624 North Glebe. And we are, you can go to the next slide if you like. So we are about to start phase 2 of our project. You may know this site based on the Harris Teeter, which is located on North Glebe Road. As phase 2, we're going to start the second building, which will be at the back of the site. And it'll also include this public park as well, which is highlighted in red. And so the park plan you'll see on the right, and I will go into the design a little bit more here in a second, but it's located between North Tazewell and North Thomas Street. And so it's kind of a great passageway from North Thomas and from the adjoining neighborhoods over into the site and over to Glebe Road as well. So if you could go to the next slide. All right. So a little bit about the design. We've got kind of 3 main zones here. The overall, I guess the park was designed to engage visitors through the zones. The first zone is the urban zone, and the urban zone is welcoming visitors through the park through an arrival plaza, which is delineated by an urban hardscape with pavers and seating areas. But it also has softscape through canopy trees and plantings along a grid. It features an open lawn for gathering and socializing. And then the next zone we go to is the pollinator zone, which invites visitors to traverse a soft meadow of landscapes along a primary promenade with seating nodes that encourage reflection, discussion, and education. And then there's a secondary pathway which engages with the landscape while also incorporating a dog run, which you see kind of on the, I guess, your right. And then finally, we have a woodland zone, which illuminates shade-tolerant plant species and the dense canopies of existing trees that are already on the site, while providing visitors with another opportunity to learn about the site ecology or to just simply enjoy the park. So our really overarching theme here is ecology, and going through the public engagement process on the site, we found it was really important to the community to feature the pollinators and just nature overall. And so you'll see with these names, that was an important feature as well. You want to go to the next slide?
Sure. Can I just confirm, Mary, that we had someone write in that they can't see the slides, but you can see the slides, right? On our screen?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not sharing either, so.
Right. No. I know.
Okay.
I wanted to make sure that the virtual participants could see that we're screen sharing.
Yes.
But it sounds like we can, so we'll try to troubleshoot that
Okay.
with somebody. Yep, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. All right. So we have 3 proposed names, and we were following the Arlington County naming conventions when doing this. So you'll see the historical, geographical, ecological. So but we're going with the first word is Buckingham, which is the historical context that we are discussing, as well as geographical for the neighborhood. So the reasons for the names were Buckingham Pollinator Park is the first one. So this eliminates the pollinator wildlife, which is present throughout the park. It encourages active learning through the informational signage about the pollinator species. So you'll see we have the pollinator hotel, the bugs, and then as well as we'll have additional signage throughout the park. And then we also have the Buckingham Meadow Park, which draws its name from the characteristic pollinator meadows within the site. And again, that's one of the main features of the park. So, and then the final one is Buckingham Garden Park. And this one draws more on the history of the park. And it highlights the history of the nearby Buckingham Village Historical District, which, as many of you probably know, housed the garden apartments and utilized the design principles of the Garden City to set design precedent for the greater Arlington County region. So those were the 3 names that we were offering up. We did do public outreach, and so I believe Buckingham Meadow Park was the one that was most appealing in that, but definitely the Buckingham seemed to be the favorite of that. So you can go to the next slide. Okay, I believe Walter, if you would like to take over from here.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Walter
Thank you.
Gonzalez, planner with DPR, the Park Development Division. Currently, right now, the timeline process, we went to the Park and Recreation Commission as an info item back in July. And tonight we're here presenting to the Historical Affairs and Landmark Review Board. Some of Michael had mentioned some of you all might be new here, so you might be wondering why we're presenting the park naming to you all. As part of the Arlington County naming policy, the Park and Recreation Commission will present a recommendation of the proposed names to the county board for approval. But as part of the naming policy process, we present to the Historical Affairs and Landmark Review Board to solicit recommendations from them as well from the proposed names, and also the Neighborhood Advisory Committee as well, or as now known as RNAC, the Arlington Neighborhood Advisory Committee as well. And we're tentatively scheduled to go to them in September. Once we complete those 2 commissions, we will then go back to the PRC with a final recommendation, and they will discuss and provide a recommendation for a final name on the park name. And after that, we take that recommendation from the PRC to the county board for approval.
We have one public comment.
We did, yeah. So thank you all for presenting. We're going to move on to our public comments. So Mr. Byrne, if you are ready to speak, you have 5 minutes tonight because you are speaking on behalf of the Buckingham Community Civic Association, I believe.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay. I am the president of the Buckingham Community Civic Association. I was
Mr. Byrne? We lost you.
will be located on the hello?
Dr.
Can you-
Byrne?
Yeah,
Hi,
I get interrupted.
Sorry, Dr. Byrne, we lost you for about 10 seconds. So
Okay.
if you can hear me, if you would like to start from the top, we had
Okay.
just heard you introduce yourself and you can start
Okay.
your 5 minutes over again.
Okay, thank you. This keeps on happening to me, by the way. I am the president of the Buckingham Community Civic Association. I would therefore like to inform you that the association voted on July 27th to recommend the naming of, quote, Buckingham Pollinator Park for the new park that will be located at 624 North Glebe Road. The park will be within the association's neighborhood. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Uh, the the park will be located on the former sites of an automobile dealership's parking lot and a halfway house. It will be outside of the Buckingham Village Historic District. As the site never contained any of the village's buildings or grounds, it has no historical importance. County staff has proposed the following three names for this park, which you've just heard.
Mr. Byrne, we lost you again. Yeah. Oh,
I think it was right after he said it does not have.
Yeah. Dr. Byrne?
The association's members supported the names Buckingham Pollinator Park because it publicizes the importance of restoring the neighborhood's historic pollinator populations.
Dr. Byrne,
Yes.
hold on a second. I'm sorry to interrupt you again, but we lost you for about 15 seconds. So may I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
I think you should turn your camera off. Are you able to do that? Because sometimes that helps with the connection.
Okay.
And
I've
then-
turned it.
Yes,
Okay.
and then we think we lost you right when you were saying it doesn't have significance.
Oh, that early.
Yeah,
Okay, you missed what I just said. Okay, so I'll have to, okay. As the site never contained any of the village's buildings or grounds, it has no historical importance. The county staff has proposed the following three names for this park: Buckingham Pollinator Park, Buckingham Meadow Park, and Buckingham Garden Park. All of the names identify the Buckingham neighborhood. The first name also recognizes the importance of installing plants in the neighborhood and park that will increase the populations of monarch butterflies and other native pollinators. Those populations have greatly declined within the county because of its development and urbanization. The Buckingham neighborhood now mostly contains townhouses, multifamily dwellings, and grassy lawns. As a result, the neighborhood does not have many such plants. The association's members supported the name Buckingham Pollinator Park because it publicizes the importance of restoring the restoring the neighborhood's historic pollinator populations. The park's so-called pollinator meadow zone will be quite narrow. It is not likely to actually resemble a meadow. The name Buckingham Meadow Park therefore appears to be inappropriate for the park. The park will not contain a garden. The name Buckingham Garden Park would therefore also be not appropriate for the garden. We understand that Buckingham was once known as Buckingham Gardens, but that's kind of irrelevant to this. So therefore, please vote to support the name of Buckingham Pollinator Park as our neighborhood has suggested. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Byrne. Byrne, up for the board.
I'll go back to the slide that shows the three names in the corner so you all can see what the options are. There you go.
Comments or questions?
Yeah, I think that Dr. Byrne makes, the Buckingham Civic Association makes some good points. And I would support Buckingham Pollinator.
I would also, I should probably full disclosure, I live 800 feet from here, so I should probably. Yeah, but I agree. I think when I think meadow, it's a much more expansive space. And my concern with garden as well, there are so many of those critical garden apartments several blocks from here. It's really not the heart of the garden apartment community. It's a little bit further in. This is right next to Harris Teeter. It's not really garden apartment land. So, and I think that the community association is right that it would be nice to highlight the importance of pollinators.
reasons. So.
I was thinking when I looked at it that the garden name, in addition to the historical connection, albeit a couple blocks away, refers to the three different kinds of gardens that it has. If you interpret garden a little bit more broadly, it has a woodland garden, a meadow garden, and then a standard garden. But I also think that there's no real reason to overrule the civic association if that's the preference in the area. So.
I would agree. I think the pollinator part, I think it makes sense, and also since it's supported by citizens association, I agree that I would be supportive of that thing. To fit the park too. So.
Does anybody have any, who's online? Does anybody have any comments, Jerry or Gray? Okay, we aren't hearing anything, so either you haven't muted or you're comfortable with the approach. So
I'm comfortable with the approach. This is Gray. I think it's not enough to call them. It's not really a meadow, and I believe that Mr. Burns made that point. I think having Buckingham in the name is useful. I do have one question. If you go back further than when it was a parking lot and a car dealership, what was on this side? I think I remember that it was farmland. So, you know, I don't know if we want to in any way reference that, but I certainly think Buckingham Pollinator Park is fine because pollinators are so important and it gives an opportunity to explain and educate about that. But I'm just curious as to what was there and whether there was anything of particular historic interest.
I mean, Walter, in your working on this project, have you uncovered anything of interest? Because I know you all have been working together to develop these names.
So we looked at the Buckingham CA, the history around the site, but I think for the sake of this, the developer is really that proposed the three names here. And they decided to stick with these three.
Okay.
I don't think we uncovered anything of significance at the time.
So it was likely the farmland of some of the Ball estate or some other nearby farmer.
Yeah, there wasn't anything that stuck out. And we also wanted to avoid people's names.
Fair enough.
Well, with that, we'll make a motion and go from there. So, all right, I move that HLRB recommend the 624 North Lee Park Harris Teeter site plan be named Buckingham Pollinator Park.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Murray Davis,
Yes.
Dan Dreyer,
Yes.
Andrew Fackler,
Yes.
Ray Hanley,
Right?
Sorry, yes.
Jerry,
Yes.
Joan Lawrence.
Yes.
I used your first. Sorry. I don't know what it is last night. Rebecca Meyer,
Yes.
Katie Myers,
Yes.
Mark Turnbull,
Yes.
Andrew Winchell.
Yes.
Carries, moves forward.
All of that.
All right.
Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. So the board voted for Buckingham Pollinator Park. And I can connect with you via email, Walter, to share anything that you need from us to work on your project in the future.
Thank you, and thank you all for allowing us to present to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item is discussion around Arlington 2050 initiative.
Okay, so I'm going to give some context for this one, and then we'll we'll open up the discussion to everybody. So I put some of this information in the email, but back in February, the Arlington County Board Chair Libby Garvey announced what's called the Arlington 2050 Initiative. It's been a year-long effort to engage with the Arlington community over a simple question of what do you want Arlington to look and be like in 2050? The goal for this engagement is, or for right now, is really to focus on like envisioning and gathering findings from different areas and people in the Arlington community. And so they wanted the commissions in the county to discuss this as well. So they're asking that the HALRB have a discussion about this very question. And the end goal is for them to gather all of these findings from this engagement and have a presentation on it at the December County Board meeting, with the ultimate goal of creating a strategic plan from the data gathered. So I don't have too many details about that strategic plan. I think they're just trying to figure out what the answer is to this question for everybody in the county. So there are a couple different ways that you can participate. I sent another way you can in an email, which is by submitting a postcard from the future. So after tonight, if you wanted to do that, you're more than welcome to do that as well. But we can also have our discussion about it tonight. And I'm going to make sure that our minutes and the recording gets to the appropriate people in the county board so they have record of our conversation. So basically, the two questions that they want you all to discuss and answer they're pretty big questions. And so I put them up there so we can reference them, but I'm going to read them aloud for just for the record. So what are the HALRB's top 3 priorities if resources were not an issue and you were able to implement those priorities in 2025? What would the effects be by Arlington 2050? Would this impact all of Arlington or just your neighborhood, industry, or field? And then one of the examples they gave was because Arlington heavily invested in its transit connectivity in 2050, no resident needs a car to get around within Arlington. There are no car accidents and there is less pollution than there was in 2024. Residents are more active and healthier. Arlington has truly become a 15-minute city because anyone can get anywhere within 15 minutes. So that's the first part. The second part and the second question is, in 2050, what new topics do you think your group will be focusing on? What are the issues that you believe Arlington will face? And what does success in those areas look like? What could be possible challenges to that success? So I think for tonight, you all could have a very casual discussion and kind of, if you wanted to have it be more structured and focus on one topic and then the other, you're more than welcome to do that. But I have a feeling that there are a lot of ways both of those questions tie into each other and that the conversation should just flow naturally. But that gives you some food for thought. So I'll leave it there and see if that sparks anything.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
For
Oh,
us.
and Rebecca has her hand up online. So
Rebecca?
Rebecca.
Oh, sorry, I did not mean to.
Oh, okay. Thought you were just dying to share your vision.
Yeah.
No,
Oh, Gray might
I
know.
did my
Gray.
best for yours though.
Well, I don't think I'm dying to share my vision, but I did give this some thought, and this is just as a point for discussion, but I came up with a little bit of a long, it might be reduced kind of vision for what might be done in the short term and have a longer term impact. Perhaps I could just read this and then people can consider it or move the discussion on to other things. So my proposal would be something like expand county residents and others' appreciation of Arlington as a county with an interesting and diverse history through the preservation of existing historic assets and the expansion or establishment of additional educational facilities and tools, such as museums, markers, and experiential learning opportunities. And what I have in mind here, what would be the kind of the status of things after this would be done, would be that there might be by 2050 a permanent home for the museum that's focused on African American history and the importance of that community to the county. Perhaps some additional attention to how immigrant communities have entered and prospered and made the fabric of Arlington County so interesting over the middle and the end of the 20th century and on up to the present. And then maybe an additional set a concrete goal of additional 10 or 20 historic site markers or better improved labeling for historic sites. And then perhaps we'd have in place one or two trails, learning trails that would go through the county and be available to students and interested outsiders who would like to trace through an experience of moving through the county some interesting aspect of our history. So that's kind of the thought that I had given, and maybe some elements of that would be in mutual interest.
Great, that was very thoughtful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us and putting so much effort into that. It's really nice to hear.
I think just to piggyback off Grace, I hadn't thought of sort of really any of that honestly, but I think that the idea of an actual physical like museum, actual like sort of actual more established place to sort of gather on its history is actually pretty interesting, intriguing, and doable, and I don't know, sort of logical outcome of sort of expanding upon historical outreach in the county. I think it makes a lot of sense. Something that could be done, you know, within 25 years or 10 years or whatever. So I think it's a very interesting proposition for sure.
I agree too. One thing I keep thinking about is that what will we have left of historical value by 2050 if the county does not take a more proactive position to preserve what we have. I mean, every time I go by the Thievery Lothrop place, I cringe. That was just such a tragedy. And I think that it's going to be important. Yeah, I like the idea of having a museum, but I don't want all of our history to be consigned to a museum. It would be nice to have actual living, active buildings that represent Arlington's history instead of historic markers and museum exhibits. And so, I mean, it's great to talk about it, but I think county policies that favor preservation more strongly than they do are going to be absolutely essential. Otherwise, it's going to all be torn down historic houses or 50-year-old plus houses, and very unthoughtful, non-complementary buildings put in their place. Every time I go out exercising in Cherrydale in particular, it seems like there's another house that's being torn down. And I know that we have issues with affordable housing, and houses that are being torn down are more affordable to people who've got fewer resources than what's being built. So it's just, there's no good answer to that, I know. But by 2050, I would like to see minimal change in our historic structures, that we've expanded the HRI and we've actually identified commercial, school and residential buildings that are beyond what we've already developed, that are part of Arlington's history, and that actions have been taken to preserve.
And actually, kind of piggyback, and maybe you'll remember because we were on the board at the same time, I seem to recall we were dealing with the project right across the street from us. The old lawyers building that became ultimately at the end of Jerry's Subs and Pizza. There had been talk about maybe that could somehow be saved and repurposed as an Arlington Historic Museum. So it'd be like, oh, you're saving this old historic building, part of Lawyers Row, and you're bringing a museum. No museum, historic building is gone. So there doesn't seem to be a commitment on either front.
I think in addition to political priorities and funding issues, I think climate change is going to be a potential obstacle. And I think that we're going to need to anticipate and work with or work against changing climate to be able to make preservation workable, whether that's flood control, storm control, or temperature changes. But I also wanted to say, I really like what Gray said about the educational trail. I think there are parts of Arlington where there are compact enough areas that could work. And if you've been to Boston, they have the Freedom Trail that was put in the Bicentennial, where there's footprints on the pavement and you follow them around to different historical sites. And that is really experiential and, as Joan said, not just contained in one building. That would be an interesting idea.
I would just like to add that to what Joan said, I think that's really important that we try by 2025 to find a way to strengthen the county, what regulations or whatever that would be more amenable to protection of sites like the ones we've lost in recent years. Part of the problem there was the paperwork. I mean, it was just, we didn't have strong enough protections to slow that project down to the degree that actions, there could be more careful study and other discussions about what options there were. It's probably a pretty big priority to get in place those kinds of legal or regulatory protections. Otherwise, we'll be always playing catch up behind the other pressures, the economic pressures that move quickly to clear lots and sort of stay ahead of the regulatory structure, which is relatively weak. So that should probably be a priority, and one that is rather sort of lower hanging fruit than something like developing an actual facility. But I do want to add that, I find it disturbing that the Museum for African American History in our county has had to move 3 times and still has no permanent home and no real support from our county, whereas our county is eager to support many other things that are much more expensive. I really do find that kind of troubling. And I think, that's something that from a historic point of view should not be neglected in the short term.
If I might say something, I think if we're going to be talking about museums, we have to say something about the current Arlington Historical Museum on Ridge Road, which was established as a public-private partnership between the county and the Arlington Historical Society back in the 1960s. But the county provided initial capital, provided the site and some lots behind. And it is a museum for all groups. It has displays on African American history and perhaps some on immigrant history. So it could be a museum. It's supposed to be a museum of the entire county's history, not just one immigrant or ethnic group. And but the county has never found a way to provide operational funds, so it isn't as strong a facility as you would think a community of the size of Arlington's would have. And I would think by 2050, the county should be able to come up with a way to better support that facility and make it something that we're all proud of.
To kind of echo a few other people's points, especially Jones. I do hope that we see historic buildings left in 25 years. I think especially some of the smaller buildings like the homes and some churches. And I'm definitely not anti-development. I love the Langston Boulevard plan, and I'm really excited to see what that looks like in 25 years. And it's a corridor plan, just like kind of the Orange Line plan was, which I think worked amazing, and Columbia Pike as well. But within those, it's still great to have pockets of historic homes. I think that's what a lot of people think of Arlington as, and it'll be really interesting to see if that's really true in 25 years, if absolutely status quo is the same. But I do think the county could do a lot more to promote keeping homes. And just in my neighborhood, a few things I've seen is now there are people tearing down some of the historic homes and just leaving them as lots. And there's no homes going up right away. They're just sitting there for now over a year. We have one foundation and one lot just sitting there. And so some, I know some areas require, a building permit for what you're going to build before you demolish. Because people think they want this great development site, and then it just sits there as an empty lot. And of course, these empty lots aren't very well taken care of either. So I think that, that's kind of an easy thing. I think a lot of the historic neighborhoods, the setbacks are now really messed with because they allow new homes and any new development to be much further up than the historic homes, which just makes the neighborhood look very uncohesive. But I also think they could give, a lot of carrots to people to, if you save the historic building, you can have density, you can have adaptive reuse. I've seen so little adaptive reuse in Arlington, which has really surprised me. It's always just use it as is, or tear it down and build something as high as you can. That really shocked me moving to like a historic area of the country. So I think, just pursuing more adaptive reuse would be great. And then I hope that we can have more money to do a great HRI, because I do think there's a lot of maybe residential areas, maybe streets that would like to be included. Maybe not whole neighborhoods, or even, and then I know churches were really missed on the last HRI I think, and I've talked about this with a couple of you, but I think partly people thought churches wouldn't be torn down. And also, that's a kind of a more sticky subject, telling churches what to do, but a lot of those are really at risk right now. So that would be another thing that could be done now that would really help.
I would add to Nan's point too regarding climate change, just sort of further hitting home the argument of, the building already built is the most sustainable. I mean, I run into that sometimes with people being like, oh, we want to build this magnificent LEED rated recyclable materials building and whatnot. But oftentimes, I mean, it doesn't, you can make it as sustainable as you want, but you're still gathering new materials, mining and constructing, and, versus the trapped carbon of an existing structure, just retrofitting it for current needs. So just further hammering home sort of that argument for keeping things as it ties to the climate change goals that Arlington, claims to have.
Greenest building is the existing.
And I think the adaptive reuse of an existing building ties into what both of you were saying. It's when we were looking to have our 1909 house remodeled, I had somebody come in and said, well, I can tear it down and build a new one on this lot for much less than it's going to cost you to remodel it. So we're not on the same page. Thank you, but no thanks. But that was the attitude. This is in the 80s, but it's not changed really.
All right, guys, I gotta go. Maybe by 2050, I get my permit approved. So.
Mr. Walker, your COA was approved at the beginning of this meeting. So I've
been here the whole time. I never even got to talk about it. Okay.
No, well, it was on the consent agenda, so I had said that we wouldn't have a discussion on it. I can email you tomorrow all your final paperwork for it, okay?
All right, thanks.
Thank you. Jerry, did you want to share something? I see your hand is still raised.
No, I'll put my hand down.
Okay.
If you all don't mind, I'd love to chime in just real quick. And I thought this was kind of a fun exercise. I don't do this too often, but I thought this was appropriate since we're thinking of the future. And I typed it into AI. What would be an answer to what does historic preservation look like in 25 years? I'm not going to read the whole thing, but a lot of what we've mentioned in this discussion, we've hit upon. And with what AI, what the robots think we should be doing. And so I just wanted to kind of hit on it real quick.
Those who program the robots think we should be doing.
Yes. So the robots give 8 things that are going to probably be future of preservation. And it's balancing preservation and modernization. Kind of hit on that, finding that balance.
Been going on for centuries.
Yeah. Adapting to regulatory landscape. Kind of hints on the fact that, preservation can sometimes come off as having stringent regulations and guidelines, but adapting to flexibility where you can. Integration of new technologies. We kind of hit on that with that being an opportunity to continue to do outreach and educate about preservation in the history of Arlington.
Like solar panels.
Solar panels, that's right. Those types of technologies, which we're hoping we'll see more as technology advances. Sustainability with preservation. I think that also coincides with another one where they say climate change mitigation. I think that's going to continue to be a big push that preservation is really going to have to show that we're walking the walk, that we're doing it. So I think that's something that we are really striving for with the program now. Community engagement and diversity, that definitely is a priority that the county has shown, that our new plan has shown. So we're really hitting on those marks. Education and preservation traits. I think that's an interesting one. And I think as people who are living in homes, people who are trying to maintain them are finding now and have been for a while how tough it is to find people in the trades and trying to find people that are willing to do the work that, I even know people who now are trying to start their small businesses and can't even get on the contractors list that the state shows because they don't have general building contractor experience, but they know how to preserve windows, so they know how to do other preservation, conservation work. So those are things that the county, I think, could do better with promoting. And then funding and financial support, which is always one of those things. You have to put the resources if you're going to try and move a program further into the future. Now, fortunately, some of the things that you've mentioned, we already have in our plan that we're trying to achieve in the next 10 years. And I heard you, Gray, when you said you want to have certain things done by 2025. We'll talk about that later. But I think that we definitely hit on a lot of the things that we're going to see. It's just going to be dependent on, the county showing what it's supportive and where the priorities are, and that they have the resources and the goals to try and back that up so that we can try and do that.
Well, that's an interesting exercise you just did.
Yeah.
I guess we have to give some attention to our future robotic overlords, but it seems to leave out some of the heart and soul of what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
It's a lot of the technical fixes that you can pull from the internet, but it doesn't really talk about building a community that identifies the meaning of living in a place like this and what it has meant over the 3 centuries since the Europeans arrived and the time before that, and the really it's kind of, Arlington could be this kind of really little example, a little tiny place that's an example of so many of the crossroads of the struggles that our country has and is going through. And that's kind of lost in what you've described. I think one goal that we should have is to remind people that there's a story here. It's a story that's closely related to the story of the United States. And, we're where some of the great leaders of the country have been and where some of the great embarrassments have occurred. And I think, that's something that a machine like that can't really capture. And hopefully we can help remind the county that we shouldn't lose it.
Andy, did you
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that there would be some sort of goal to counter county's policy about basically turning what were originally supposed to be neighborhoods into apartment complexes or high density. I'm all for the idea of conversion of some houses, and, but you know, I think that the way some of the stuff I've seen so far, basically, is not only house removal, tree removal, and we'll just plant a couple of extra little trees, you know, not if they'll ever get to be large trees before they get torn down again. I think that the county could look over the next number of years and set some sort of limits on how much of the area can be redeveloped as multifamily housing on sites. And, you know, whether you save 10 or 15% of the neighborhood at that point, that's it. But then if you're going to maintain the history of from the 50s, 40s, 50s on, you just can't continue to tear everything up. You're going to have some sort of stop. And I think maybe board ought to start looking at, well, neighborhoods as they deplete and saying, hey, you know, this is far enough, and see if the county would go along with that. Because I think that if you convert everything or you allow developers to develop everything, so far there's been, relatively speaking, a few multifamily. We're still seeing many more McMansions. And, you know, maybe you require the preservation of the front yards, the front facades of some of the homes. But at some point, if you don't, we're going to have nothing but McMansions and apartment buildings. You're not going to save any of the more modest houses from the 30s, 40s, 50s. We're very poorly represented in terms of historic districts or whatever from the 30s on. We really don't have that much. We can make a stab at making Columbia Pike, trying to keep that area in the garden apartments or whatever, and that's all well and good. But I think that the single family neighborhoods throughout Arlington are going to end up ultimately destroyed if we don't have some sort of percentage whether that should be retained. And you know, you can do that by saving the houses or trying to save the street facades of some of the houses and incorporate that stuff instead of saying, oh, let's, you know, wipe out all the trees. We can always plant new ones and wipe out the house, garage, and everything, and we'll have a little apartment or multiplex development. And after that, and the McMansions, that's all you're going to have left. So, I mean, I'd like to say, I think if the counties are all interested in that idea, we ought to develop some sort of guidance about that, because otherwise it's going to turn into, it isn't going to be, and I'm seriously questioning whether you can call it a county at that point. It's just going to be another city.
What I was hopeful for with, you know, allowing more development in neighborhoods is that people would maybe take an older house and maybe it would become a duplex. And that never bothered me because the density didn't really bother me. It was definitely losing the historic homes. And I have been really disappointed that that does not seem to be the case. It all seems to be all tear downs.
Yeah, that, I mean, and again, that goes against sustainability and that adversely affects climate. And it also just robs areas of character.
I would have liked to see that, if you were saving maybe kind of front, not just the facade, but like a strong portion of the house, then maybe, you could add on a unit in the back or, that kind of thing. But that was just not, I think the full, you can develop anywhere, like very broad approach strikes me and is not good for preservation without any, carrots to save buildings at all.
And Ann was talking about Boston. Two of my kids went to college in Boston. One of them lived in an historic house that was beautiful on the outside. And the apartments were not, could have been in better shape if they were student apartments. But they divided the house, this elegant old house, into apartments. And so that increased the density. They weren't all student occupied families living in some of them. But that the house still looked like a historic house. So that would accomplish what you're talking about. It's actually in Somerville, now that I think about it. Close enough.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for your input and thoughts. And is there any further, thoughts on what you can also do with the postcard ideas about cats? They're taking more information, so I think more the merrier at this point. But really say so. Thanks for that. Yes. Or at least AI will read it or something, right?
And Gray, if you don't mind, would you be willing to send me what you read at the beginning of the discussion so that I can include that? I'll follow up.
We have further comments. Can we do the same thing?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, you can do the postcard 100%, but if you want something that's a bit more, just here's a paragraph of thought, you can send it to me and I'll make sure it gets.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you guys.
The chair's report, and actually really sort of more thought again here. One thing on the chair's report tonight, I think is just going to be, so I guess maybe it was 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, all the different board heads, mission heads, essentially, I got an email from Olivia asking them for different input on what should be the county priorities for the legislation at the state level. Is there any thoughts or ideas on that? Pass it on. If we can discuss it now a little bit, obviously, but there's probably a little more thought that needs to also go into it too. So please feel free to share with me, and it'll be okay.
Yeah, you can share it with me.
Yeah. So I don't have any particular at a state level that I'm per se. That's at least in terms of preservation per se. But I'll definitely listen to any ideas.
The legislation that Patrick Hope was instrumental in passed regarding demolition of historic properties probably could be even expanded.
Well, and actually, Lauren bringing up some of these people who are skilled in restoration work that can't always get
Good point.
proper licensing. That's their regulatory changes.
Yeah.
Right there. Okay. That literature. But those are two good ones that I will make sure that we get over to the state level ones that we can. Particularly, I mean, both of them, but the trade, the skilled trade one that sort of goes to other state and other sort of national sort of emphasis on sort of building up the trades in general. So I think that's one that could definitely be really important that state level, national level, not to get too crazy about it, but it's a very, very important issue in general.
Because Virginia is the Dillon's law state and only has the county only has powers that the state gives to it. That's one of the reasons why statewide legislation is really
And why this legislation is such a huge thing.
fortunate that it didn't come real soon enough, but it's there, which is great.
Yeah. For chair report today.
Staff report is pretty brief. I just wanted to give you all an update. If you haven't been checking the news, we definitely the Riesland project update on July 22nd. The county board approved on the consent agenda the agreement to convey the Reeves farmhouse to Habitat for Humanity. Definitely check around now. If you want to see the press release, Habitat also has done their own press release. But in this, they approved also the allocation of $2.5 million in federal community development block grant funding, which is CDBG funds to support the adaptive reuse of the farmhouse. And we all celebrated, for a couple of days, but the work kind of started right away. Also, just to point out, Libby, during the county board meeting, even though it was on the consent agenda, she did have some very nice remarks. If you all want to watch the recording, and actually stood up and clapped to anybody who was in the room who worked on the project, how thrilled they were. But they just had such a full agenda because there were no issues, is one of the reasons why it was kind of comfortable to move it forward. We are anticipating that archaeological activities will start, which is part of the project to do the addition that you all approved in 2023. And we think that will probably start happening in September. And then there will be architectural salvage that'll also be happening probably in September, October. There are already things that we're starting to do for educational research. I believe the family is going to be visiting the property at the end of the week to do a final walkthrough, talk about some stories. And we're hoping to continue to work with Habitat to come up with some creative ways to use those video recordings and those interviews with the family, which is part of a requirement where we will start sharing that with people who are going to be living in the home, as well as people and the public can have access to that information. So it's just going to be ongoing for probably the next couple of months. We'll be involved a lot on that project. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. And then also at the same meeting, this was on the discussion, the Barcroft Master Financing Development Plan was approved by the county board. This meant that the county basically is signaling that they approved the land analysis that took place in early 2024, that Jen was a part of, and Dick was a part of. I listened to their discussion, and there wasn't too many questions I felt that that the board needed to ask. They felt very comfortable with what was provided to them. There were no questions that they had that were related to anything with preservation or the changing of the conservation area lines. And it was more of a recognition, and I think also to remind the public that there will be more discussions in the future as the details of the projects start to come forward. And the Gerald Lynch team, we've met many times. They will continue to come here to tell the HALRB about the projects that'll be happening. That's either with them doing the rehabilitation of the existing buildings to actually clarifying which buildings they will be demolishing to do redevelopment. But this is a big priority on county staff in many ways to continue to try and find funds to support the work that's going to be happening there. And if you ever want to know what it is per month, you can give me a call and I can tell you what are the latest discussions. So, but I wanted to give you an idea of how that went. And that's pretty much our chair staff report. I'm not the chair. You're the chair. I'm the staff.
Anything else we do the order? Folks
I'd
online?
just like to congratulate the staff on the hard work with the Reeves project. I think that's
Yes.
the Riesland project is exemplary. I wish we'd been able to do the same thing with the Fabry House.
And I've had two people say like, you're on that historic review board, right? Like
great job on Reflip.
Oh,
But
That's really good.
from different like perspectives too, like someone very interested in the way they're going to use it, and then someone very happy that they're preserving the building, so. Usually people.
That's an example of
work.
what we're talking about, and we'd like to see happening all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you're having those experiences. And
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you for saying that, Gray. I have to admit, this was a year and a half, maybe longer than that, of really just a lot, and I should count how many meetings I had on it. And the amount of times as well as how many times we thought it wasn't gonna work. So I'm really glad that it did. And I know that that is small in the timeline compared to how long this project has been.
I hate to
2001.
say this,
So-
but it certainly demonstrated the value of the county owning a property like that. Even though it's a major
Yeah.
headache, it blocked the kind of rapid destruction that an outside developer would have done. I mean, in the end, we may have lost it anyway, but at least we had the time to think it through and for you guys on staff to do all your work. So I don't know, it's in it, you know, in the end, it's a very small amount of money for these big property, well, for whatever's left of these big properties that can play a significant role. And it's hopefully the county will see a way to do this more. Anyway, thank you again.
Yes.
Anything else? That, we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a quick question. Does anybody know any Civil War reenactors? I am looking for 2 Union soldier uniforms.
Yeah, the guy, the fellow that is works for the Park Service and does the, but I'm sorry, did that,